Another in the series of presidential profiles, Zachary Tayler, 12th President of the United States.
I sincerely rejoice at the prospect of peace. My life has been devoted to arms, yet I look upon war at all times and under all circumstances as a national calamity to be avoided if compatible with our national honor.
Zachary Tayler never lost a battle through his 40-year career as a soldier. Yet Zachary Tayler, a completely fearless man, detested war and the agonies that resulted from it. Death and bloodshed were a way of life for Tayler from his early childhood. When Zach was still a baby, his family moved to Kentucky, where Indians roamed at will, taking scalps so freely that every farmer tilled his fields with a gun close at hand. In 1808, at the age of 23, Tayler joined the Army. 4 years later, he faced the forces of the Indian chief Tecumseh during the War of 1812. Tayler commanded a tiny garrison of 50 sick and disabled soldiers at Fort Harrison in Indiana. And although outnumbered 10 to 1, Tayler's men repulsed the Indian attack in a desperate hand-to-hand battle.
Sir, could you give us your feelings about the battle?
Well, I had the greatest difficulty in getting my orders executed. And with the raging of the fire, the yelling and howling of hundreds of Indians, and the cries of women and children, and the despair of so many of the men, I can assure you that my feelings were very unpleasant.
For the next 40 years, Zachary Tayler knew no other life than that of a soldier. Policing the wild frontiers against Indians during the War of 1812, in the Indiana Territory during the Black Hawk War, and in Florida during the long struggle with the Seminoles. For Tayler, his house was a tent, and his home the battlefield. By the mid-1840s, America was caught up in a national thirst for land expansion. Efforts were made to purchase the California territory from Mexico. When negotiations failed, President Polk sent an American force to the disputed border area on the Rio Grande under the command of General Zachary Tayler.
If our government, in settling the question of boundary, makes the line of the Rio Grande an ultimatum, the settlement of the issue will be greatly facilitated by our taking possession at once of 1 or 2 points quite near that river. Our strength and state of preparations should be displayed in a manner not to be mistaken.
To the Mexican government, this was a pure act of aggression, and they attacked. Congress declared war shortly thereafter. Less than 1 year later, Tayler was engaged in the most dramatic fight of the conflict, the Battle of Buena Vista. Under General Santa Anna, 20,000 soldiers, the flower of the Mexican army, were pitted against Tayler's inexperienced force of less than 5,000. At the height of the battle, with artillery shells and bullets whizzing past his head, Tayler's aides pleaded with their commander to retire to safer ground. Tayler's courageous reply became legendary.
Let us ride nearer, and their bullets will go over us.
Tayler's fearless courage inspired his men to hold their ground. For 2 days, the outcome hung in the balance. But on the second night, the Mexicans retreated. Santa Anna was headed home toward disaster, and Zachary Tayler was on the high road to the White House.
At the hottest and most critical part of the action, at the moment when our troops were about giving way before the greatly superior forces with which they were contending, the batteries came up from the rear, and by a well-directed fire, they checked and drove back with great loss the enemy who had come upon the muzzles of their pieces.
The victory at Buena Vista had made Zachary Taylor a national hero, and the Whig Party selected him as their presidential candidate in 1848. Taylor's political views were completely unknown. The old soldier had never voted for a president in his entire life. Taylor campaigned on the strength of his name. He refused to discuss the political issues of the day.
I do not intend to be driven from the position I have taken, which is to enter into no explanations as to my political creed, nor give any pledges to what I will do in certain contingencies, other than to support the Constitution as near as practical.
Taylor proved a perfect candidate in a nation badly divided. His military record appealed to Northern voters. His Southern background and ownership of slaves appealed to the South. The combination proved unbeatable, and Zachary Taylor was elected the 12th President of the United States. Although Zachary Taylor had apparently accepted the platform of the Whig Party, he soon demonstrated that he had no intention of being a puppet of the Whig leaders in Congress. The Constitution of the United States would be his guide.
I am conscious that the position which I have been called to fill, though sufficient to satisfy the loftiest ambition, is surrounded by fearful responsibilities and duties. In the discharge of these duties, my guide will be the Constitution, which I this day swear to preserve, protect, and defend.
The victories which had catapulted Taylor into the White House now produced his gravest political problems. The territories of New Mexico and California, acquired from Mexico in the war, were the center of a raging controversy between North and South. Would these new possessions be admitted to the Union as slave or free states? At first, President Taylor tried to avoid the issue.
By awaiting action on statehood for California and New Mexico, all causes of uneasiness may be avoided, and confidence and kind feeling be preserved. With a view of maintaining harmony and tranquility, we should abstain from the introduction of those topics of a sectional character, which have hitherto produced painful apprehensions in the public mind.
But the issue could not be ignored. And gradually, Taylor cast his support behind the interests of the North. He advocated that each state should be allowed to decide for itself, that the citizens vote on whether they would have a free or slave state. The South was enraged. They knew that neither state was likely to permit slavery, since plantation interests were not migrating to the new territories. As 100,000 settlers poured into California during the gold rush of 1849, Southern congressmen raised their voices in anger. Taylor did not believe he was favoring either North or South. He merely wanted to preserve the Union.
Attachment to the Union of the United States should be habitually fostered in every American heart. Dissolution of the Union would be the greatest of calamities, and to avert that should be the study of every American. Whatever dangers may threaten it, I shall stand by it and maintain it in its integrity to the full extent of the obligations imposed and the powers conferred upon me by the Constitution.
As fiery debates rang through the halls of Congress, Zachary Taylor stood firm. Henry Clay and Daniel Webster argued for concessions to the South. They wanted to compromise to avoid civil war. Tayler was willing to face the possibility of conflict rather than to give in to Southern interests. When several Southern leaders in a stormy session at the White House threatened to secede from the Union, Tayler told them they would hang them as traitors if they did so.
If it becomes necessary in executing the laws, I will take command of the army myself. And if any of you are taken in rebellion against the Union, I will hang you with less reluctance than I hung deserters and spies in Mexico.
But over Taylor's opposition, Congress pushed through the Compromise of 1850. This compromise provided for the admission of California as a free state, with slavery optional in New Mexico and Utah. The compromise also included the Fugitive Slave Act, which empowered federal officers to return runaway slaves to their owners. This compromise would prove to be the final wedge between North and South, kindling the passions that would erupt in civil war 11 years later. Zachary Tayler had fought against appeasement and lost the first battle of his career. It was the last fight for old Rough and Ready. On July 4th, 1850, Tayler fell ill. 5 days later, he would be dead. He knew that death was imminent. He only regretted that he would leave this earth with the taste of defeat in his mouth.
I should not be surprised if this were to terminate in death. I did not expect to encounter what has beset me since my elevation to the presidency. I have been mistaken. My motives have been misconstrued, and my feelings grossly betrayed.
Another in the series of presidential profiles, Zachary Tayler, 12th President of the United States.
I sincerely rejoice at the prospect of peace. My life has been devoted to arms.